some of the other OSIS staff are attending either TASK conference or NCSI conference. So they may pop in and out, but it just kind of depends on what's going on in their session. So today we have two things going on in our meeting. First, we'll start with cohort presentations. Each of the four cohorts will make a very brief presentation, and then we'll move on to a I guess more of a technical assistance session around parentally placed private school children. So with that, I'll go ahead and say cohort groups, take it away. And I have the presentation for, I think, the academics group with Liba ready.
If you will go ahead and share that one, Michelle.
Okay.
This is Ann, and there actually
Okay.
is only, that's all right. There's only one focus group
Okay.
cohort presentation today. It'll represent all four cohorts, but it
Okay.
will lead to some individual ones for the next meeting. So
Okay.
if you can,
And I apologize. I'm not sure why I'm not advanced. Okay, there we go.
there you go. And now if you'll go to the next slide. Good, thank you. The OSIS focus groups, as you know, are represented by a different piece of the puzzle. Those are the 5 focus groups that have been working for the past year to develop the system of technical assistance that we want to help provide to all the districts around the state. The focus groups worked separately to develop the root cause analysis and universal supports related to each focus area. And now, going forward, the focus groups will review submitted root cause analyses and then will help align the kinds of support that are going to be provided by the cohorts to ensure consistency as districts develop their improvement plans. Next slide, please. So we wanted to move into exactly what the cohorts will be doing. You'd heard about the focus groups and you'd heard a little bit about the cohorts, but not much about what they actually did. The cohorts will review those root cause analyses after they are submitted, and they will develop goals to address the areas that were identified by that root cause analysis for assistance. And the cohorts will also be the groups that are completing the required IEP reviews and develop any goals that may be necessary to improve IEP development. And then finally, the cohorts will work with the districts to develop comprehensive improvement plans so that the districts can address all of the goals based on all of the areas that have been identified as needing assistance. Next slide. And finally, we just want to make sure that you know that both the cohorts and the focus groups will be working together to provide whatever support you, the districts, need and give you whatever help you need from us.
Thank you, Ann. And this is Elizabeth. As you've seen before, all districts have been divided into 4 cohorts based on data and geographic area. You can see that Tier 2 districts are grouped at the top of the listing and Tier 1 districts are listed below. And this is just a reminder of your cohort so that you can begin to reach out to other members of your cohort. Next slide, please. OSIS has also grouped staff members by cohorts. At the next LEA call, you will be introduced to your primary contact from your cohort and be provided with some additional information. Next slide, please. So our next steps are you will receive a FormStack link in preparation for our December 2nd LEA call. The link will be sent following this meeting and is being placed in this chat momentarily. I think it's already there. Great. Please discuss the questionnaire within your districts and submit the completed form by the close of business on November 23rd. We will meet as individual cohorts on December 2nd and discuss the information from the questionnaire. You will receive your individual cohort meeting link prior to that December 2nd LEA call. All right. Thank you, Michelle. Back to you.
Okay. Thank you. And so we'll just take a moment and transition over to the, goodness, guys, sorry, I have so many things up. Transition over, goodness gracious. To the PPPSC group. And I'll pull up that slide right now.
You might want to, I'm sorry, Michelle, you might want to let me
Do you want to do that? Certainly, go right ahead.
Well, and the only reason why I say is because the one we sent out has the audio on it for everyone. So I think it may play on top of us talking about it. So
certainly.
Let me, and I hope I do this right. I'm trying to look for the second one. You'll have to tell me, do you see the PowerPoint up, children with disabilities in private settings?
I do.
Excellent. And Marlene Metz, is she on the call?
I'm here, Sarah.
Excellent.
Okay. Well, we appreciate everyone working with us on this topic today, and I hope you'll get some information that'll be helpful to you. We also would appreciate your questions and comments if you want to put those in the chat. We are having an opportunity to make some questions available to the Technical Assistance Center and hopefully get some response from OSEP on some of the questions. So it would certainly be helpful for us to add in the questions that you give us, and we will try to submit those for further information or provide a Q&A to you for those questions that we're able to respond to now. But we're going to start with just an overview of what IDEA requires in terms of private school placements. Sarah, go to the next slide, please.
Sure. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay, good.
IDEA addresses 3 different types of private school settings. They are children with disabilities enrolled by their parents in private schools, and this is what we typically call PPPSC. Children with disabilities in private schools placed or referred by a public agency. And one example is those students who are placed in private schools by an IEP team. In some circumstances, South Carolina cost shares in these placements. And then finally, children in private schools placed by parents when FAPE is an issue. And of course, you know that is subject to procedural safeguards as a section in the regulations when you have a circumstance such as that. Next slide. What we're going to focus on today, though, is that very first requirement, the LEA's responsibility for children with disabilities who are voluntarily enrolled by their parents in private schools. This requirement has both programmatic and fiscal implications. Each LEA must allocate a proportionate share of their IDEA allocation to provide equitable services to eligible students in private schools within their jurisdiction. You'll notice some terms that have been highlighted on this slide, and you'll probably realize that they may have a different meaning when we discuss them under PPPSC than what you may typically think for our children who are enrolled in public schools. For example, LEAs are not required to provide FAPE for these children who are voluntarily enrolled in private schools. The requirement is for equitable services. And in South Carolina, it's important to remember that home schools are treated as private schools. So those children are captured under this regulation as well. Next slide. As you know, LEAs have a child find responsibility that includes private schools. There's also a child find regulation that is specific to PPPSC. It says, each LEA must locate, identify, and evaluate all children with disabilities who are enrolled by their parents in private, including religious, elementary, and secondary schools located in the school district served by the LEA. The first part of this child find regulation is identical to the general child find regulations of IDEA, that we must locate, identify, and evaluate those children who we suspect are children with disabilities. The second half of the regulation helps us define this setting better. Notice that the regulations specify that the private school must be elementary or secondary, but the definitions of elementary and secondary are left to each state. It also clarifies that the LEA is responsible for students based on the location of the private schools, not the residence of the student. Next slide.
Okay. So what is an elementary or secondary school? The South Carolina Code of Laws defines an elementary school as a public school which contains grades no lower than kindergarten and no higher than 8th grade. Secondary schools may have different grade configurations, but no higher than grade 12. Preschool children below the age for kindergarten are not parentally placed private school children, regardless of their setting. Preschool children with disabilities are entitled to FAPE through an IEP. This chart, the results and outcome, compares the results of Child Find for public school children to those of parentally placed private school children. Notice the difference in age ranges 3 to 21 for public school versus elementary and secondary for private schools. FAPE must be made available to all eligible public school students. For PPPSC, equitable services in the amount of the proportionate share of IDEA funds are provided. There is no individual right to equitable services. The determination is made through annual and ongoing consultation, and it's documented on a services plan for those students who are designated to receive services.
Okay, what does eligible mean? And this was a term that was highlighted in a previous slide that I said is going to sound a little bit different from what we might think of for our public school children. Students with disabilities under IDEA are eligible until they graduate with a diploma, age out, are reevaluated and determined no longer eligible. Revocation of consent is an option that we have for the public school setting, but it is not an option available for PPPSC. There's one other condition of eligibility for parentally placed private school children: refusal of consent for evaluation or reevaluation. If these were students who were enrolled in public school, the LEA would have an option to use procedural safeguards or due process to try to override parental consent for evaluation or reevaluation. That option is not available when we're talking about parentally placed private school children. So if the parent refuses consent for reevaluation of their child who's parentally placed, the district does not have to continue to consider that child as eligible, because we will not have the data to know that. In terms of evaluation, you may think that, well, if they initially refused consent for evaluation, then we never knew this was a child with a disability. I think the one specific situation that might come is perhaps you had a child who moved here from another state and went directly into a private setting, had been evaluated and determined eligible in that other state. In order for us to determine eligibility in South Carolina, unless adequate data was available, we would have to ask for consent as if this were an initial evaluation. So if the parent refuses that, then we cannot consider that child to be eligible. Next slide. Most of the private school children with disabilities will be known to the LEA. Since LEAs are responsible for private schools within their jurisdiction, some students may reside in another district and have been evaluated there. Under FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, we would be able to send a record to another LEA when a student enrolls, provided that proper annual notice has been given. That same flexibility does not exist when a student enrolls in a private school. We must have parental consent to exchange confidential student information with a private school or with another LEA when the student is no longer enrolled. However, the LEA where the private school is located must have documentation that the student is a student with a disability in order to include him in the count of eligible parentally placed private school children. For example, when you have your consultation and you have representatives from private schools attend, they may say, oh, we have 10 students who are identified as students with disabilities under IDEA. But you cannot just count those 10 students in your count of eligible children without having the documentation that they've met those criteria. This may be a topic of conversation you want to add to your consultation with private and homeschool representatives, and perhaps your neighboring LEAs as well, where you share children in a private school, so that parental consent can be obtained and records can be shared in a timely manner. Next slide. IDEA has some specific record-keeping requirements for children who are parentally placed. Each LEA is responsible for maintaining records that would demonstrate the number of children evaluated, the number of children determined to be children with disabilities, and the number of children served. And this is specific, of course, to PPPSC. Much of this information is submitted to the Office of Special Education Services through Enrich on an annual basis. However, OSIS currently has no report that shows the cumulative count of eligible parentally placed private school children. Remember that students remain eligible and must be included in the count of parentally placed private school children until they meet one of the conditions previously discussed that terminates their eligibility.
Good afternoon. Further with proportionate share, much with proportionate share. Can you guys hear me? I think I'm having audio problems.
You're very low.
Bear with me just a moment. Let me increase my volume.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
For proportionate share, although we know that IDEA funds are no longer distributed to LEAs on a per pupil basis, that is the formula that we are given in regulation to calculate the required proportionate share. The grant award application includes a calculator, but the LEA must enter the number of eligible private school children. Eligible private school students, excuse me. These students must be counted by the total in ages 3 to 21 and the total in ages 3 through 5. Keep in mind that only those 5-year-olds who are of kindergarten age can be parentally placed private school children. The formula calculates a proportionate share based on the number of students in public school as reported in the annual child count, plus the number of eligible private school students, whether or not they are receiving services. Next slide, please. The annual count of the annual count of the number of parentally placed private school children with disabilities can be taken anytime between October 1st and December 1st. The state does not currently specify a date. However, it seems logical to take this count on the same date that the annual child count is taken, the fourth Tuesday of October. Again, we need to emphasize that the number of eligible private school children will be different from those you report on the 618 child count, which includes only those receiving equitable services through a service plan. The number of eligible private school students determined at this time will be used to calculate the proportionate share for the next grant award. These parameters may help you decide when it's best to schedule your consultation. Although you will not have your projected IDEA award until late in the spring, you may wish to use the count to project your proportionate share for the coming year. Scheduling consultations in the spring should ensure that the LEA is prepared to implement their plan when school resumes in August. It also provides information necessary to determine if the students currently receiving equitable services will continue to be designated for services the next fiscal year.
So what is meaningful consultation? The regulations are very specific on the topics that must be included in the meeting consultation with representatives of private schools and parents. There is also a Q&A document disseminated by OSEP in April of 2011 that still reflects their guidance in most of the topics. The link to this document has been included on the final slide. Their responses on consultation, equitable services, and the responsibility to eligible students should be very helpful for you as directors. Although there are many ways to document the opportunity for meaningful consultation, the one required form is called a written affirmation. The written affirmation is obtained from the participating representatives who are asked to sign affirming they have been given an opportunity to participate. If the form is not signed, returned in a timely fashion, the LEA must make that available to OSIS and provide documentation of having provided meaningful consultation.
On this slide, we're going to talk about some of the monitoring issues and questions that have come up over the last year or so. Some of the common areas of concern might be calculating based on the students served, not those who are eligible. Considering 3- and 4-year-olds as parentally placed private school children. And as was explained earlier when Sarah talked about the definition of elementary, it begins at kindergarten. So 3- and 4-year-old children are never parentally placed private school children, regardless of what their setting is. Not expending the proportionate share, not offering consultation at least annually, not considering homeschool students. We certainly do have districts that do not have a private school within their jurisdiction, but keep in mind that you can have a student change to a homeschool setting at any point in the year. So that does not having a private school within your jurisdiction does not relieve you of the responsibility to do the annual and ongoing consultation, at least trying to reach out to homeschool providers in your area, to specific parents who you know are providing homeschooling, and other organizations. Spending the proportionate share from the general fund rather than IDEA. It's allowable for you to spend money from the general fund on parentally placed private school children, but the IDEA requirement for proportionate share is that it comes out of IDEA first. So for example, if your proportionate share is $20,000, you need to spend that from IDEA. If you want to spend $25,000, including another $5,000 out of general fund, that's fine. But you need to meet your IDEA obligation first. And finally is assuming that private schools can reject services. Now, private schools do not have to come to consultation. We can't enforce that. They do not have to allow us to come on site to observe, evaluate, provide services. But like our other services to children who are enrolled in public schools, the service belongs to the child. So we may find these students through other means, like your regular community-based child fund. Sometimes they are students who were evaluated within the public school setting, determined to be students with disabilities, and then either move to a private school setting or a homeschool setting. There are so many more friendly place private school topics that we could address, but we want to make sure that we emphasize these today. We've heard from sources at the national level recently that failure to expend the proportionate share funds should be the exception, not the rule. If the LEA does not spend the proportionate share allocation in the first year of the grant, it must be carried over for the second year. Before allowing an LEA to move funds from PPPSC to another function near the end of the grant, OSIS must be assured that meaningful consultation has occurred and that reasonable efforts have been made to expend the funds. LEAs that have had difficulty expending proportionate share funds in the past may wish to consider which students they serve and the services provided. The plan must be calculated to expend the funds based on the needs of the eligible students. And I think if there is one point that we need to make sure that we're very clear about today is that we're really talking about two different counts of children. You report the students for your child count, which you recently did in October, or your annual child count. You are reporting the parentally placed private school children who are being served under an individual service plan. But for your calculation of proportionate share in your IDEA award, you're going to be counting all those eligible children. And I think we mentioned earlier the April 2011 question and answer document that OSEF has provided. It is a very good resource. Sarah, you could advance the slide. It's a very good resource, has lots of good questions and answers in it, clarifies a lot of things for us. I would suggest reviewing that. That guidance, along with the regulations in terms of getting more detailed information on PPPSC. We would love to hear additional questions for you and what other kinds of resources, technical assistance, et cetera, you would like to see in the future. And I think we have some questions in the chat. I see that Michelle has been answering some of those as we go along, but I think we have time that we could probably try to address those. Michelle, do you want to go back?
Yes.
Can we go back to those?
So certainly, I only answered one. So the first question was, oh, I guess I missed one. So whether the district ends up providing services through an ISP or not, correct? So I think that was in response to maybe something you said. Are they still counted if they are considered eligible?
They are counted, yeah, they're maintained as eligible students and counted for the calculation of PPP or proportionate share, as long as they're eligible. Now, if you're not serving them through an ISP, then they're not going to appear as a student in your annual child count that you submit to Carol here.
So next question is, am I understanding correctly that we need to establish numbers by contacting the private schools? What if they do not respond?
Well, districts are responsible for providing at least an annual and ongoing consultation is the verbiage. We know that at least annually, you've got to look at your number of students and the amount of money that you've been awarded under IDEA to make the determination of what is a proportionate share. Private schools, like I said, we can't make them attend. We can reach out. We need to have ongoing, more than just a one-shot, please come to our meeting invitation. But how are we following up? Have we emailed? Have we sent a follow-up to them? And although they may give you numbers, until you can confirm that those numbers represent children with disabilities under IDEA, you will not be able to count them as eligible students. I think it is not uncommon for private schools to assume eligibility because perhaps they know that this child has a medical diagnosis, or they've seen some needs that they believe might be disabilities, but we have to have the documentation that they meet IDEA requirement.
Okay. So next question, does the state have any suggestions for how to take this count?
I see, it looks like someone responded perhaps to that.
Okay.
I see a response from Sherry Bell that might be into the same thing, that they have an internal spreadsheet that they use to track. Mm-hmm. But yes, we have had discussions with the folks in data about how we can make this, enrich the place where this would be captured and tracked.
Yes, we actually visited one school district who just basically kept a spreadsheet every time they evaluated a student and found them to be eligible. They sort of track that. So let's see. Other than reaching out to local homeschool groups and listing information on website, what is the recommendation for reaching out to homeschool students?
I can't see the question. It said on the screen. Michelle, would you mind reading? I heard reaching out.
Okay. That's okay. Other than reaching out to local homeschool groups and listing information on the website, what is recommendation for reaching homeschool students?
Mm-hmm. Okay. And those are two great ways, and probably your best way of getting in touch with the folks who might be providing or authorizing homeschool instruction in your area. Another thing is that districts get an annual report, I believe in January of each year, from certain homeschool associations. I don't believe it's all of them, but they do have to report to your district how many students they are serving from your district, not by name, but at least by number. So that way you know that particular association does have some of your students. Some other things you might consider is information that goes with your routine child find notices to that it's a much broader kind of thing, that services are available or may be available to those children in private school. Perhaps also for students as part of your exit package, when students come to withdrawal, sometimes we don't know where they're going. But to have something that goes with that withdrawal packet that says something to the effect of if your child is a student with a disability, he may be eligible for services under this. So I think there are probably a lot of different ways. It's not easy because once they are not with us any longer, or if they've never enrolled in our schools, it's hard to maintain that contact. But I would use all the variety of sources that you mentioned, and perhaps some of the others that I said as well.
Okay. Next question. How are districts tracking PPPSC students? Is this something that could be added and enriched when the student does not have a ISP?
Yeah, and I think that's what we were addressing earlier
Mhm.
with the idea of the spreadsheet, and hopefully at some point getting that into Enrich.
Right.
Yes.
Yes, we have been in contact with Carolyn and her team, and she is reaching out to Enrich to see how we can capture that. So we're working on that. Once we offer an ISP to the parents, how many days do they have to let us know if they are accepting the services or not?
There's nothing in the regulations that would give you a timeline on that, but I would use whatever time frame you're using for your students when you offer an IEP. Generally, you're having the meeting, you've got the parent there, you're going to follow up with prior written notice. I don't think there's any reason that you should have a different timeline for students who are parentally placed in private school. But I would make sure, if you've not heard back from that parent in the time frame that you use for your other students, that there is some kind of written notification from the district saying we have offered your child an ISP and we've not heard back from you. Now, just the fact that they have not responded or didn't accept the offer of the ISP does not take them off of your list for eligibility. They can turn down your services and still be eligible children, because we know that because we've not reevaluated them, they've not graduated, they've not moved out of your district, and they've not aged out of the program. So they're still eligible students to be counted for proportionate share, even though they rejected your offer of an ISP.
Okay, next question, and I'm glad to see that Carolyn is on this call. If they leave and do not want services, how are they coded in Enrich? Moved, known to be continuing, or dropped out? Do we have to do a PWN?
I think part of that is a Carolyn
Yes.
question, if she can respond to coding in the in Enrich. Oh, I see Barbara's on the call, and she's given us the state law on the January 30th homeschool. Thank you, Barbara.
Mm-hmm. Carolyn? Okay. Well, we will get that information out.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, I'm here. I missed the
Okay.
question.
Oh, so if a student leaves and they don't want services, how are they coded in Enrich? So if they moved, or known to, moved, known to be continuing, or dropped out, how do you code them in Enrich?
I think that's one of the codes that Becky submitted to Enrich to add into the system, but currently there's not the only options we have are connected to indicator 11
Thank you, Carolyn.
and the
Thank you.
reevaluation process.
Okay. Do you have to do a PWN, Marlene?
If they leave without a meeting, if they leave and it's unknown, I'm not sure what.
Yeah. Well, do we have to do a PWN? And maybe that's just a general question. Do we have to do a PWN?
We would do a PWN, and probably Ann or someone from monitoring might want to address that, but we have to do a PWN anytime we have an IEP meeting to provide that information, those decisions, summary of those decisions to the parent. But in the case of them just leaving, if I'm understanding the question, that's not necessary. That wouldn't have been connected to an IEP meeting. It's a withdrawal or.
Yes, that would be a separate add action in Enrich to withdraw the student. That was Ann.
Thanks, Ann. So if a student is enrolled with us and has an IEP, but moves to a private school in our LEA, are we to count them in our calculation?
Yeah, as long as that student is known to be a student with a disability and he resides within the jurisdiction of your district, he is an eligible parentally placed private school child for purposes of calculating your proportionate share. Whether or not he falls under your plan to spend your money, or even, as we had a previous question, even if you've offered the ISP and the parent does not accept your offer on that, they're still eligible children.
Okay. Next question. I understand that based on the regulations, we are still obligated to reevaluate PPPSC every 3 years, regardless of whether they have an ISP or not. I'm wondering how other districts are tracking these students for reevaluations. Another reason to be able to track these students in Enrich.
Yes, that's a good question and a good point, and something that we're aware of. We've seen, like Michelle mentioned earlier, districts who just have their spreadsheet of evaluations, whether or not the child was determined eligible, the dates, the pertinent dates that you would have entered into Enrich, which you would have to do for evaluation anyway. The only issue, the difference is, like I said earlier, is that Enrich doesn't keep up with this cumulatively. So there not being an active student in Enrich, it's not going to pull up with your 3-year reevaluations. So that's going to have to be in the hands of the district until some other mechanism could be added to Enrich to capture that. I hope I said that correctly, Carolyn. Please correct any misinformation that I gave.
Okay. And Barbara Drayton stated that, that state law requires that by January 30th, homeschool associations must report the number and grade level of children homeschooled through their association to their respective school district. This requirement has been in state law since 1996.
So that is a group, like we said earlier, you want to make sure that you include those homeschool associations when you provide your meaningful consultation, because you know that they have some of your students.
Okay. And Dina Parrish asks, is it possible to compile these questions into a Q&A document that can be shared with all after this presentation? And yes, we can do that. And if, of course, if you have any other questions, please let us know. If there are any other questions today, you can either raise your hand or you can put them in the chat. Just know that Becky has established a PPPSC work group, which is comprised of all of the teams, the fiscal and grants management team, the data and technology team, as well as members from the 4 focus groups from the program side as well. So hopefully with this work group, we can come together and get all of your questions asked. As Marlene said, in some instances, we may not have the answers immediately, that we may have to reach out to one of our TA providers, but just rest assured that we'll do what we can do to try to get your questions answered. Okay. So one more thing. Just a reminder, or acknowledge that on November 29th of this year marks the 45th anniversary of the IDEA Act. I will put, OSERS has a page for the 45th anniversary where they have resources. So I will make sure that I put that in the chat for anyone that is interested. So if there are no more questions, we thank you so very, very much for your attention, and we look forward to, answering any more questions that you may have regarding PPPSC. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday.